Thank you for that. And again, ladies and gentlemen, namaskar. Welcome to the 15th edition of the Jaipur Literature Festival 2022 at Darbar Hall, protected by Dettol Banega Swasth India. This festival brochure and flyer, if you'd like to have for the next few days, are available for purchase at the information desk. And now we are delighted to introduce the next session, the Tapestries of Life, uncovering the life-saving secrets of the natural world. This session, like the last one, is presented by the Royal Norwegian Embassy, and we'd like to thank His Excellency Hans Jakob Frydenlund for his presence during the session and for helping us present the session as well. This session is a part of the Urgency of Borrowed Time series. It's another recorded one, so as soon as I'm done with my introduction, we'll have the video up for you to witness. Academic and writer Anne Sverdrup-Thygoson's recent book, Tapestries of Life, explores the close-knit relationship between humans and the natural world, while highlighting the deep connection between our everyday lives and nature. In conversation with conservation biologist, columnist, and author of Wild And Wilful, Neha Sinha, Sverdrup-Thygeson discusses the life support system intricately laid out all around us and our consequential intertwined fate. And Sverdrup-Thygeson, forgive me for any mispronunciation again, if you're also watching online, is a Norwegian professor in conservation biology with a passion for the hidden biodiversity of insects and for all intricate and fascinating interactions in nature and their importance to human beings. Thygeson writes narrative nonfiction that has been translated into 25 languages for both adults and children. Neha Sinha is a conservation biologist again, an author and a columnist. Her critically acclaimed first book, Wild and Wilful, tells the story of 15 of India's most iconic wild species. Sinha heads conversation and policy at the Bombay Natural History Society and is a leading commentator on the environment, writing for Hindustan Times, The Hindu, Bloomberg Quint, Telegraph, and others. She is the 2017 recipient of the Wildlife Service Award by the Sanctuary Asia Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, our next session right on your screens.
Norway is happy to be back at the Jaipur Literature Festival, this time as country partner. I'm delighted that there is a great international interest in literature from Norway, and the interest is steadily growing. We are stepping up our efforts to promote Norwegian arts and literature abroad. This initiative will involve increasing funding for international projects to promote Norwegian artists and authors, like we do here at the JLF. And I'm so happy to be here. So I hope you enjoy listening to all Norwegian authors presented here and also literature from around the world. I wish you a great time at the festival, a time filled with knowledge and ideas, thoughts and expressions. Thank you.
Welcome, everybody. We are here to talk about Anne Sverdrup-Thygoson's amazing book, The Tapestries of Life. This is a book about how we are connected to nature. It has the full title says Uncovering the Life-Saving Secrets of the Natural World. And it's my great honor and privilege to talk to a woman writer, but also somebody who practices conservation biology. So a woman who walks in the forest. That's really exciting for me personally. And I want to start off straight away by going into this really clever passage in this book. on finding mushrooms, searching for mushrooms. So this is what she writes. I've been on the lookout for luminous honey fungus myself for several years to no avail. In the meantime, I settled for edible fungus, also a source of intense experiences. I'm like a woman possessed. I'll go just that little bit further, then a tiny bit further still, all in the hope of spotting a yellowish orange cluster of chanterelles shining at me. My mushroom mania, I love this term, my mushroom mania is restricted to a minuscule part of this vast and complex kingdom. So this is so exciting for me, Anna, to read because, exploration is such a human tendency, though it's not always easy for women to explore. And I want to ask you, what is it like being a woman walking in the forest and finding all these amazing secrets? And tell us a bit about your mushroom mania, as you call it.
Yes. First, thanks a lot for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be here and to talk to you. And yes, I think being in the forest is one of my favorite places to be. There's so much life there, so much hidden secret life that you can't really see, but you can still feel it. It's one of these places that I think ties you into something bigger than yourself. So it's a place I go a lot to sort of contemplate and think and just feel that I'm part of something bigger than myself. And especially, I love fungi and I love insects, these two huge, parts of biodiversity that most people don't care that much about. But they're so important. I mean, we are so tightly interwoven into this tapestry of life, like my book is called. And this is what contains us. So to me, it's really inspiring to be out there, and especially in the autumn when I can go hunting for the edible mushrooms. That's the closest I can get to any sort of, getting crazy about playing. I don't know what people play on horses or whatever. That doesn't really interest me. But when I out looking for forest mushrooms, I think it's hard to stop, and it's a very nice way of interacting with the forest ecosystem.
It's a wonderful image, Anna, to imagine a woman walking in a forest, searching for mushrooms. It's your own kind of treasure hunt in a way. And you do mention your kids in this book, and you do mention running straight into this dead tree. So do you think your feminine voice, do you think that adds to your writing? Do you think that's something that contributes to your space as a writer?
It probably does, I guess, and I think quite often, in many cases in science, as you will know, it makes a difference actually what sort of perspective you bring into research, and there are many cases like that when female scientists sort of enter the scene and start working with the topic. They might bring a different perspective that will also, shine new light on the scientific development. So, but of course, I'm lucky. I live in one of these countries in the world, in Norway, where women and men are pretty much equal, and I can do pretty much the same as a man would be able to do. But of course, some parts are still different, like giving birth to kids, and So it probably, I guess we have sometimes a different angle and bring something different to the table as female scientists and writers.
I see a kind of tenderness in this book. It's a very tender book, and I'm really interested that you write about such unglamorous things. You write about termites, giving life to the soil. adding moisture to the soil. And, it's also something I'm very passionate about myself, the ugly animals, the animals that we think don't deserve to kind of be in the world because we don't find them attractive or beautiful. And of course, you have another very fine book on insects. So tell me more about, your love for insects and for the unglamorous things. And I think in your writing, you're making a case for how they're not actually unglamorous. You're making a case for how they're so important and interesting, really. And maybe we need to stop using the lens of beauty for everything. Everything doesn't have to be beautiful, it's still useful. So tell us more about bringing out the unglamorous in this book.
Now, I think it's a super important point, and it's really the core, the heart of my writing and of my sort of outreach engagement as a scientist, because all these millions of species that we hardly ever think about, and we can't see them. They are small and they live hidden lives. They are still the main part of this tapestry of life. And I think sometimes you can envision our world as a hammock, where all these species make up the fabric of the hammock, and we humans, we rest in this hammock. So all these species are actually what's sort of holding us up. And then when we are not aware of the importance of all these species, we don't treat them well. And then what we do when we lose species, or just populations are dwindling of many of these, like fungi and insects, what we do is to sort of make holes or pull out threads of this fabric in the hammock that is holding us. And I think we really should stop and think what we are doing, both for our own sake, because we need all these strange and fascinating species, but also because we are super lucky to be living on this one place in the universe where we know that life exists. And that also gives us a responsibility towards all the other species we're sharing this tiny ball of life in the universe with. And most of them are not glamorous. Most of them are small and maybe ugly in some people's eyes. But I guess beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And if you know more about these species, the lives they live, and the importance of them, I think that adds to changing the way you look at them. I think it will help you. And that's why I like to tell stories, fun facts and serious stories about these species, because we need to realize that there are so many of these small, not necessarily beautiful in all people's eyes, at least, species that really makes up the basis of life here. So, and we depend on them.
I'm very struck by the range of this book. I mean, you're talking about butterflies with blue wings, you're talking about mushrooms, you're talking about insects and trees, you're talking about industry. It's a really broad book. It's almost, it's a really good snapshot of biodiversity. Was there a single defining moment for you when you knew you had to write this book? And in the scope and the breadth of it, because it's really very broad, and it's not just about Norway, it's also about other countries. It's, it's really biodiverse. It's a forest of ideas in this book. So do you have that single defining moment when you knew you had to write something like this?
Maybe not a single defining moment, but there was a very clear purpose about why I wanted to write this book, and at the exact time, because I had actually started working on a different book. And I had to put that one aside because, now it has been postponed a bit due to COVID, but in China, in Kunming, the world leaders will meet. They were to meet last fall or last autumn, more than 1 year ago. It has been postponed, so now they will meet in April, May, to create a new deal for nature, to create an agreement, a global agreement addressing the biodiversity crisis. And I knew this meeting was coming up, and I thought these issues, taking care of biodiversity, taking care of the basis for our civilization, that's way too important to leave it to the politicians. It's really something we all need to engage in, because it's about your life and my life. It's about the chance of good lives for our children and grandchildren. So I really wanted to write this book, and I wanted to write it broadly and in sort of a engaging and entertaining way, although it is a serious subject, so that people could sort of prepare, get some knowledge, and hopefully engage a bit more in the discussion in all countries that needs to be the basis for these politicians that will go and decide together really the fate of biodiversity. So sort of the outline for the book were this concept of ecosystem services. And that's why it gets so broad, because all sorts of species give us goods and services. This nature's contribution to people, this is really the underlying topic. And then you have to look wide, and you have to look into the details. And all sorts of species and all sorts of places all over the world are part of this. So actually it was a very sort of conscious idea behind the book, and also the timing.
That's really interesting. Of course, the Convention on Biological Diversity, which you're talking about, has never got the kind of attention that, say, the Climate Change Convention gets, or, of course, trade deals, the WTO gets, and I think we have this bipolar disorder towards nature. Some of us think we can live without it. More and more people in the cities are completely disconnected. And then the other narrative is just of gloom and doom and extinction, in which people think nothing can be done because the planet is warming. But I think in many ways your book and your work is about showing what we still have. And though we have lost a lot, there's still a lot that we have left, and it's important to be able to save it. I think what you're trying is saying that if we don't know what we have, then we won't care for it. And, if we don't care for it, then we're not going to kind of have, the resolve to save it. So, it's interesting, I thought there were so many parallels between this book and Sapiens, which also is very broad. And one of the reasons why I say that is because this book has so much of industry in it. Like, you talk so much about nature that has inspired industry or products, and it's very intersectional in that sense. So when I went into this book, I thought it would be about scientific papers, and it would be only about the animal or the mushroom or the insect. But you're talking about, say, vanilla that is found in an orchid, but then is part of an industry, in which it's made synthetically. Or you're talking about this beautiful butterfly that has blue wings, but the wing actually doesn't have a blue pigment. It's just a kind of almost an optical illusion, and how industry is trying to mimic that optical illusion, because then the color never fades. So it's kind of equal amounts of industry and all the things that inspire industry from nature, as well as animal behavior, or the way the forest kind of behaves. And I find that very interesting. So how did you come to this position as a writer? Because sometimes conservation biologists will only talk about an animal's behavior, or seasons and trees and ecology, but this is very much beyond that.
Yes, I guess it's this idea of all the nature's contribution to people, which the IPBES, the sort of the sister organization to IPCC, the climate panel, the IPBES, they use this concept, nature's contribution to people, which is another sort of term for the ecosystem services. But I think I wanted to use that sort of concept to show that a lot of, I mean, of course, all food we eat comes from nature. Of course, we know that it's logical, but still, like you were also saying, some people tend to forget and think that, you know, yeah, like if you live in a city, you don't have this link to nature. So I wanted to show all these connections, how a functioning intact nature, rich in biodiversity, will give us our food, of course, but also medicine, and all sorts of like spices and vanilla and inspiration for new products. So there are all these. It's both that it's basic for the way we live, but it's also a hint of for those people that only think about economics. Maybe they can sort of embrace the idea that it even pays economically to take care of nature and to take care of all the biodiversity, because maybe we find a new important medicine in some strange fungi or plant that we have really not looked at yet, and then we need to take care of it. I mean, if that plant goes extinct before we find its potential, then it's lost for us. So that's one thing. And then also I want it to be more than pure use. I also want to emphasize this sort of just the fascination, the respect for nature part, because I think also that these species they have their own life rights. So that comes back to this responsibility we have as humans, knowing what we're doing these days to biodiversity, and knowing that we should change some things, and that we have a moral obligation, I think, to do.
Yeah, no, it comes across very strongly. It has the science, it has all the facts about, you know, how nature is giving to our lives and our economies. But it also has that curiosity. Because, I mean, that's why I started with you walking through the forest or running through the forest, because, you know, I think that appeal to the heart, you know, is also so important, in which we let something be for its altruistic value, because it deserves to live, it deserves to be on this earth with us. And I love the little portion on the moving slime. And for those who don't know, it's a slime that is able to move. It kind of puts out these threads in order to find food. In this case, it was oatmeal. There was an experiment done, and you know, the slime is able to move and find the shortest way to go to the oatmeal and to eat it, which is so interesting. And most people, you know, when they see fungus or anything that seems to be not having a face, you know, I think people just say, oh my God, that's so disgusting. But I actually wanted to read out 2 lines from Mary Oliver's work. Of course, she's such an inspiration to all of us, about how nature is so raw, and nature, you know, has its own rules, really. And that comes across very beautifully in your book as well. You know, how there's a system, and even in decomposition there's a system, and we need things to decompose, and we may find something disgusting or rotten, but it's actually fulfilling its own place in the cycle. So Mary has written this essay, Mary Oliver. She's talking about a fox that's eating a dead animal. So she writes, the fox beside the icy pond had been feeding on an old frozen raccoon. A bad heap, bones and tallow and skin, but better than nothing. For weeks on my early walk along this path, I saw the fox as he dipped into the dark dish of the frozen body, rasping and tearing. So it's actually quite a, you know, graphic image of this fox eating this kind of dead body, a corpse really, which is so decomposed. But it's so important for the fox to get through winter. And it's important that she's writing that again. And in the way that you're talking about your rotting trees, you know, rotting trees are so important, and dead trees, we shouldn't remove them from the forest. So I really like the fact that you're bringing out all aspects of nature and not just the ones that we like. I must ask you, what is your best lesson from nature personally in your life?
That is a difficult question. But I think maybe I would have to answer this feeling of awe, this feeling of both being amazed and impressed and fascinated, but also feeling that I am part of something great, that I am one little piece in something much bigger than me. And I think it's amazing that we walk among all these wonders and we hardly notice. So I think a sort of a respect and a sense of time, maybe, of time and belonging, that we, in one way, we are a small part of this big network of life, but then in another way, we are here just now, and we are lucky enough to be here, to see what we see, and we have, abilities and power to change things. And I think this keeps my motivation sort of burning for talking about nature and for making more people understand why this is so important. So I think it's something sort of spiritual, at least very deep, that I experience when I'm out, especially in forest, but also sometimes in other nature. It's tying us in to time and to place and to lives being lived around us. And some are much shorter than ours, some are much longer, and we are amazingly enough part of this.
Yeah. I must read out my favorite portion from this book, which is connected to what you're saying. Okay, so this is page 242 for those who have the book. Once upon a time, all the world was forest. It was big and dark and dangerous, with wild animals and scary things that filled us with fear. We humans were only able to let down our guard once the forest was felled, and we made a clearing, a place where the light penetrated. At the same time, as the forest becomes ever smaller and the population ever bigger, a different dream has emerged. The dream of finding our way back to the wilderness, to the old untouched natural forest, to our origin and our identity. And just as this kind of forest can stir me up with an intense joy, I may, without warning, feel a dark claw trap this brightness in its grip, making me catch my breath abruptly. I can feel a profound sorrow, because such forest barely exists anymore, because the few tiny remaining fragments are under constant threat from economic growth, the demand for more resources, which are our notions of progress. This really strikes a chord, because in India, especially, every, square inch of land is contested. There's a fight over literally every square inch of land. So whether it's a wetland or a forest or a grassland or any kind of mangrove, any kind of ecosystem, people are fighting because we have so many developmental challenges and so much population. And a lot of conservation in India is actually about grief. And you talk about ecological grief in this book, about losing that landscape or losing a way of life or that spiritual connect that you just spoke about. So how do you personally deal with ecological grief? Because no matter how much we save, we're also losing at a very fast rate. And sometimes, when we try to convey this, it kind of doesn't get through sometimes to the people we want to convey it to. So how do you personally deal with that? E.O. Wilson called it living in a world of wounds. He said that if you feel something for nature, you're kind of alone in many ways.
Oh, this is a good question. I think it's this mixed feelings because something it touches upon something you mentioned earlier too, that, you know, these things you have in your heart, you really care about, and you engage in them. And then when you see that things are sort of going the wrong direction, it's an immense grief. And I think my way of coping is to, I mean, I need to know what's going on, of course, but I can't really spend too much time on the saddest parts, because then I would just not sort of find the energy to go on. And I really believe in the power of many sort of ordinary people, I mean, non-academics, joining together in engagement for nature. So that, I think that's where I find my hope, that by communicating, by doing outreach, I hope to get many people to sort of own this love of nature and love of an understanding for biodiversity in their own hearts, so that we can build up this strong movement together that will change things, because things need to change. I mean, this is what the IPBS is talking about. This is what they will be talking about in the Convention of Biodiversity meetings too. We need a transformative change of society. We need a new way of living together with nature if we are to be able to go on. I think it's, if I'm feeling really sad, I need to go into those parts of nature that are as intact as possible. And I'm lucky to have some of those close to where I live. And I guess at least for a while, I can sort of heal my heart and soul there, and then find new strength to go back and fight for the keeping of these places, and making more people see how important it is. That's this paradox, you know, that we need nature and we need to use it in ways, but in the way of we do it today, we also destroy it. So we sort of destroy our own basis, which is incredibly sad.
And we tend to destroy it in a way that is completely callous, in a way that we don't even see what we're destroying, you know. So much of our civilization is, or so much of the new kind of civilization we're trying to make, which is fast economy, fast growth, you know, growth versus development, really, not socially conscious development, but just fast growth. It's predicated on destroying nature. It's like the more you destroy or the more you clear land or clear ecosystems, the faster we can grow. And certainly for the big Asian countries, the big emerging economies, this is a huge challenge for us. And it's interesting that nature is a spiritual source of spirituality for some of us, and we go back to it when we are feeling so sad. And I think the pandemic also showed that. Many people, even on my Twitter, even people responding to my writing, would started noticing birds outside their window, started noticing animals, and they were like, what is this bird? I've never seen it, you know. And I'm like, it's always been there, you just haven't seen it, you haven't noticed it, you know. So I felt like maybe the pandemic created a kind of curiosity and love for nature. But one of the things that I think this book does very well is it presents nonfiction writing of a certain kind, in which you have very much a serious topic, which is the biodiversity crisis, ecological grief, and lots of facts. But you've done it in a way that's very easily digestible. So it's not fast food, but it's food that can easily be digested. So yours is kind of nonfiction writing, which is very appealingly direct and appealingly simple. So tell me how you reached this kind of balance, because I'm sure it couldn't have been easy to find this narrative tone.
No, actually, I was a bit worried when I started writing this book, because I knew what I wanted to tell the readers, but I wasn't sure how to hit that balance. But I think when you, sometimes you can just tweak a story a little and it makes a lot of difference. I mean, Greta Thunberg, the youth that has done a lot to engage people in the climate, the Friday for Futures and climate engagement. I think she has a sort of a bit of a different approach. She will say to the United Nations, that I want you all to panic, because she's frustrated that we don't understand the seriousness. But I can't. I mean, if I panic, I'm no use. So I'd rather say, I want you all to understand how amazing this is, how beautiful it is, how amazingly well put together, how all these indelible links between species, all the interactions, how marvelous nature is. It's too beautiful, too fantastic that we can let it go. We can't destroy these fantastic mechanisms and functions and species. And it's actually, I mean, we have the same goal. We want to engage people, but we sort of maybe push different buttons, and some buttons work on some people and some on others. But for me, I know, like I've been saying, that for me, this beauty and fascination is such an important part of my inspiration. And I think that goes for more people. People are easily getting tired of all the negative stories. So yeah, maybe like you are doing too, you try to reach them through a different channel. You try to rather reach their hearts with facts. And I think then people will own their own engagement in a different way, and they will feel it much stronger. So I'm quite convinced that some people will, you can get new people on board by finding another way than this very negative way of talking about it, because there is still hope. We just need to sort of go together and live together and change our ways. And then it's definitely hope.
I completely agree. In fact, even in my book, Wild and Wilful, I wrote it for a common person who hasn't read a biology paper, because I felt that, I didn't want to talk to scientists. I wanted to talk to anybody who maybe doesn't even like animals. I always think about how can I write in a way that somebody who doesn't like a crocodile or a king cobra, how can that person find something interesting? So I think that's really beautifully done in your book, Anna, and I must congratulate you on how light the voice is, but also how deep it is. Because, sometimes one is worried about being inaccurate while writing. Popularly in science, it's quite difficult to write about science in a way that's popular, but also accurate. So then that takes me to my next question, which is, who do you read? Who are your favorite authors, and which authors would you recommend?
Oh, there's so many, and of course some of them will not be translated into English, but I do love, I guess, one like both the books and the poems about nature of Robert Macfarlane is something that inspires me. I think they sort of hit these same buttons. They have this fascination for nature, and he also uses a lot of wordplay and works a lot with the rhythm of the language, which I really love. And then, of course, the Sixth Extinction, I think, is a great book to read. And then I also enjoy some of these novels that have nature as part of their perspective, like Barbara Kingsolver, that has written about both butterflies, the monarch butterfly in Northern Europe, but also about coyote, sort of like you were saying, species that most people don't like. And those are novels that are fiction, but I think it's good to sort of combine reading fiction and non-fiction that describes nature, maybe especially nature that I'm not familiar with. So I really look forward to sitting down and reading your book, because definitely that will be a lot of nature that I'm not familiar with. I think that even broadens the scope, even more fascinating species out there.
I can give you a spoiler. My mother got slapped by a monkey, and that's there in the book. So it's all kinds of animals, so huge,
Yeah.
gigantic elephants and monkeys that open doors and slap mothers and and
Any
small
fungi?
animals. Oh, no fungi,
No
but
fungi.
I have butterflies. I have butterflies and I have insects, but not fungus should be next. I'm also fascinated by fungus, also because it has such a bad name because of COVID, right? So we had so many waves of COVID here in India. I had COVID 2 times, and black fungus and white fungus. Black fungus got a really bad name, because people were dying of it after COVID. And the moment you say fungus, people think it's a really bad thing that causes diseases. And I think fungus needs better PR today. And I'm going to recommend your book to people so that they can, look at it in a holistic way and not just consider it to be a source of disease.
Oh no, it's so much more. I mean,
Of course, yes.
fungi and insects are these hyper diverse parts of biodiversity that really together that's the fundament for our lives and societies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think we are in many ways going through an explosion of nature writing, and it's very welcome. There are so many books now on trees, and also a few books on fungus, but I think yours hits the right spot for me because it's not too scientific and it's also very friendly. You don't talk down to your reader, and that's something that's very valuable. So it was really fun to read your book. And I wish you great success in your next book. Can you tell us what is your next book going to be on?
It's actually on forests.
Wow.
I just started.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's about ecosystem services or walking in the forest?
No, it's more about different types of forest and tying it together with human history and human use, as trying to paint both a very small picture, the millimetric picture of a beetle under the bark of a tree, and up to zooming out to the landscape level, and putting us in there too as humans. So we'll see in a couple of years.
I love it already. I love insects as well, by the way. I love bugs, and so I love it already. And I think what I take away from this talk is that the way to the head is through the heart. I think we should all try to not maybe tell people to care, but show them why they should care. If
Exactly.
you show them why they should care, then they'll probably end up caring. So thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you, Anna, and it was a really enjoyable book. And I'm looking forward to also reading the insects book and also your next one.
Thank you.
So
Thank you for a very nice conversation.
I'm
Thanks.
glad.